Okay, Jerry, I am going to hand it over to you and you let me know.
I'll
Let's
be
make
glad.
sure it'll change.
Well, thank you, Nancy.
Yeah,
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. I guess we can still say that just a little bit.
sure.
When I got up this morning and knew that I was going to get to spend some time with you, I immediately thought, geez, I wish this was in person. And then I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds and said, no, I don't want to do that because I know how cold it is there. So I rang in the new year with family in Ohio. And while it wasn't anywhere near the temperatures that you're all dealing with today, it was more than cold enough. One of the mornings we woke up to 3 inches of snow and it stuck. And so I had a call with somebody, and then I saw that my 4-year-old granddaughter was outside with her dad playing in the snow. So I immediately went outside. So I had on a sweatshirt with a hoodie. I had on shorts and I had on no shoes or socks. And I just went out for a minute just to try to get a rise out of her. And you should have seen her. She looked at her dad and said, "Look at Poppy." And then she looked at me and said, "What are you doing? Go back inside. Put on long pants, put on shoes, put on mittens, and put on your hat, and then come play with me." It's always a gift and blessing to partner and collaborate with Nancy, and just for many reasons, but her support through all these years about children and families that are often forgotten in all of this, as you all know so well. And so special thanks to the Illinois Family Resource Center, to our house. Um, God, it's a blessing to get to spend a little bit of time with you. Our topic's going to be rebuilding trust in early recovery. And what I want to focus on is the relationship this morning between parent and child. Parent and child. How do we begin to heal that, if you will? But please take the material that I present and really use it in a wider realm of rebuilding trust in relationships across the board. Doesn't necessarily have to be with a child and a parent. It could be with my sibling. It could be with my parent. It could be with a friend. It could actually even be with a coworker. But what I want to do is spend just a little bit of time. I've spent my entire career, over 4 decades working in treatment with little kids, so prevention in a treatment setting. And so I have been doing this for a very long time. And I really wanted to put everything in context because as you take this material and create other ways and strategies and tools and techniques to rebuild trust, that you do it with a background that makes sense. And boy, I've made enough mistakes for all of us for a couple of different lifetimes. You don't need to repeat those. So we'll start with that. And before we go to that next slide, what I want to do is just show you 4 pieces of artwork where children are able to illustrate really what they need in rebuilding trust. Artwork, sometimes overlooked, great therapeutic tool for children. Kids often can draw what they initially can't say. What we really want them to do here is how to separate this person that they love, whether this is mom or dad for this morning's discussion, from the disease that goes like this, because this is what kids see. So here is this mom or dad filled with beauty and goodness. Underneath it all, much more often than not, grabbed by this disease. And so what kids see is more of the disease. And remember, SUDs are progressive in nature. So as time goes on, what happens is you see less and less of the person and more of the disease. So in working with kids in an all-day process, at the end of the day, we have them draw a picture of how has addiction hurt your family. So next slide. And take a look at this. And I mean, kids are brilliant in what they draw if they're given safety. So there's the beer running down the hill. And notice it has arms and legs. And there's dad chasing the beer. And I knew that the dad had an alcohol use disorder. It was very clear. But as a child described the picture, there's mom. And usually on the second day of a program, kids get to share these if they want to. It's their picture. And I asked, well, what's mom doing? Is mom trapped by addiction too? And the little girl said, oh, no, 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 no. Mom's about to tackle dad before he can get to the beer. And yet what I want you to think about, look at the picture, look at that little girl and her brother. You know, in the dance of development, when parental attention is focused elsewhere, there's no partner for the dance. And kids often have to dance alone. And I'll tell you, in all of my years and in working with moms and dads in treatment, you know, would often tell them individually and in a lecture setting that maybe the biggest tragedy of this disease is the love that's present doesn't get consistently expressed. And one of the things that kids tell me all the time, I wish my parents would spend time with me. I wish my parents would play with me. I wish my parents would listen to me. Next slide. This slide, some years back, half a dozen years back, actually made it on the NBC Nightly News. And so if you start in the middle on the left-hand side as you're looking at it, you know, there's dad grabbing pain pills. Dad had been in recovery for about 6 years, something we'd often see, and he's using pain pills, but he's taking too many of them. He's not taking them for physical pain anymore. He's taking them for emotional pain and other things. And there's mom down at the bottom. And what she's doing is mom's confronting him because she's also in recovery. And there's dad hitting mom. And then you go across because mom makes a phone call to all the doctors prescribing the meds, said, stop this. And so then dad transitions to using heroin. And there he is with a bag dealing heroin, and there's the police. And if you go up to the top right-hand side, he's in jail. And then dad gets out of jail, and never again, he promised. And so many of you are aware of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And take a look at all the ACEs in this picture that this little boy drew. You know, there's domestic violence going on. There is incarceration going on. There's active addiction going on. And I'll tell you, ACEs play a huge role in rebuilding trust, as they're one of the things that gets in the way. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Next slide. How has addiction hurt our family? And again, drawn by a little boy. Up at the top, lies. Lies. And dad, have you been drinking? I mean, look at the eyes. Look at how this is dad coming home late at night. And, oh, no, son, of course not. I'm going to bed now. And I'll tell you, I've spent my whole career trying to tell professionals, trying to tell people in recovery, family members, that kids know a whole lot more than we ever give them credit for. They take it all in. I think for 7 to 12-year-olds, which has always been my specialty, I think the problem is kids take it all in, but don't have the development to make sense and interpret it all correctly. And that's where we can come in and help them, because often kids see things and they sense things. I was doing a children's program just a couple of weeks ago. I'm back doing children's programs, which I'm so thrilled about. It's been a couple of years. And there was, a little boy talking about how I know something's wrong, but everybody tells me it's okay. And I asked the rest of the group, how many of you ever felt that way? And all the hands go up. So kids need to be told the truth in a way that's age appropriate. We'll come back to that. Next slide. And lastly, here is a mom with her daughter. It's Friday night. Mom is in active addiction, active substance use disorder. And she's in an incredible amount of pain. And she's, you are too much. I am leaving. And there's this little girl just sobbing, going to be left home alone. And the amount of times kids get blamed for or are made to feel responsible for and carry around guilt and shame that something's wrong with them. And so let's go to the next slide. Recovery is incredible. I have seen so many people get well through the years. I have seen so many families get well through the years. Boy, what a gift when that happens. But what we very rarely talk about is the trauma of early recovery. and there is a clinician, oh, brilliant, prolific author, clinical chops like you would not believe. So you want to look later, Google Stephanie Brown. She worked at the Stanford Alcohol and Drug Treatment Program in Northern California. Stephanie Brown. And what Stephanie wrote a book called The Alcoholic Family in Recovery, probably
Mhm.
15 years ago. I know it's a long time ago, but in the book, she interviewed families in recovery. What was it like? What were the pitfalls? What were the challenges? What got in the way? Which led to her talking about this trauma, which very rarely gets spoken about, let alone addressed. And what Stephanie says is there is more disruption and turmoil that comes first. I mean, think about looking at life events that create a huge amount of stress. And think about, like we talked about this morning, think about all the people now in Southern California that have lost everything. Oh man, I can't even begin to say I understand because I don't. Oh, think about the stress around losing a loved one. Think about all the drug overdoses that take place across the country. And then look at other things like starting a new job or moving. Well, gosh, it's what Stephanie has always said is people aren't putting their life back together. They're beginning a new life without alcohol and drugs involved. And what a huge stressor that is. So, what does that mean for me as a children's therapist? Number one, I better be able to explain this to boys and girls exactly what's going on. And anything I recommend needs to be very simple and very doable. Sometimes we create plans that are simply impossible for people to be able to do. Next slide. What do we tell people in early recovery all the time? And I've said it for years. Nancy has said it for years. What do we tell people? Focus on your recovery. Focus on your sobriety. Focus on getting well. Back in the day, it was, I want you to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and I want you to get a sponsor. These days, we might say you need to get a recovery coach. Maybe you need a peer specialist. For some people, it's a return to their faith. So they're going back and beginning to practice that. For others, it's embracing a culture that got lost in their disease and doing all that. There's so many things going on. And while all of that is important, and yes, people need to focus on that because this is difficult. Think about it. This is uncharted territory for a lot of folks. And for a lot of folks where it's not uncharted is because they've tried before and they weren't able to stay in recovery. And so what do these folks need? Well, you know what? They need a map and they better have a compass to see where they are directionally. They need a guide. And what they need recovery GPS. It's truly what they need. And so with the parents focusing on this, it's been really tough for kids, especially for kids that aren't getting education and support. A couple weeks ago, doing a children's program, and we're teaching kids about treatment and recovery. We'll talk more about that for a little bit. But we say treatment and recovery is a superhero. It's the only thing addiction is afraid of is treatment and recovery. People stick with treatment and recovery and addiction can't bother them. And then kids ask, well, what is this? And we list things. And there was a girl there. Started to get tears in her eyes as we explained this. She goes, I often get so mad when my dad goes out to those meetings because from a kid's perspective, what's changed? My parent is still gone. And they still
Mhm.
and they still seemed a little bit stressed out. And a lot of them that went to treatment, now they have friends with no last names. That's Phil M and Ann S, and it just doesn't make sense. And what this little girl is able to see and to say is, I need to talk to my dad. Now I understand. I want him to go to those meetings. I want him to do that stuff because that's what keeps addiction away from our family. And so, next slide. And so, what this creates is yes, parents need to pay close attention to their individual recovery, but they also need to begin to spend close attention to their children. And this is the first of 3 challenges I want to set as a framework as we get into some strategies and some tools. I call it the dilemma of the double focus because I need to spend time in both places with my recovery, absolutely, and also need to begin to spend time with my kids in a way I haven't been present in a long time. And then that can create a lot of fear and anxiety for the parents. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So that's that first challenge because it's only 24 hours in a day. Next slide. Second challenge is when I work with little kids and their parents, and sometimes I'm working with a child and the person with the substance use disorder isn't well, so I'll work with the kid and the other family members or a foster parent or a kinship family. But for kids and their parents, they both carry a lot of emotional baggage. And I know one size doesn't fit all, and I don't mean to generalize, but if I were to give you a theme, what I see with adults, an incredible amount of guilt and shame on 2 levels. Number one, to wake up and finally realize this disease I never asked for has wreaked havoc not only on me, but on the people I love. Oh my goodness. But as you're about to see, so many of the people in treatment and early recovery are also beginning to remember that that's the kind of family they grew up in when they were little kids. And so, a double-edged sword with that. What I see with kids is they're hurt and they're scared and they're confused. Again, they need explanation, and some get angry among the other feelings that they have. So that's the challenge. You got to be careful in setting this up because it can blow up if it's not done in a real structured, safe kind of way. Next slide. Basically, they don't understand each other, parents and kids. And there's this lack of patience. Hey, some of you are very familiar with the 12 steps. And if you were to go into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting today, a narcotics meeting today, you would hear people in the rooms talk about HALT, H-A-L-T. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. 4 places for people in recovery to try to stay away from. But I'm here to tell you, HALT also applies to little kids. They're hungry for an emotional connection with the people they love. They're angry because they're disappointed when promises are broken and people don't follow through or show up. They're lonely because this is a disease of isolation and I really can't tell. And they're tired of this. And so keeping that in mind, that's the second challenge as we look at strategies. Next slide. There's an organization that I really want you to know about. To me, and I'm not associated, I'm not affiliated, I in no way work with them, but boy, do I admire them. It's the Addiction Policy Forum, APF. So they're a think tank out of Washington, D.C. that focuses on anti-stigma, that focuses on public policy, that does some of the best training. And hey, folks, the training is for free. For example, tomorrow, and you can sign up tomorrow if you've got time, Dr. Mark Gold, who's been around a long time, a medical doc, is an expert in this field, is going to be talking about marijuana and adolescence and what marijuana does to the adolescent brain. But go check them out. They also do research. And so in 2022, the Addiction Policy Forum partnered with the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and they released a study called Patient Journey Map, Substance Use Disorder, Treatment and Recovery Experiences. Next slide. And there are 2, here they are, there are 2 findings in this pretty exhaustive report that really have relevance and applicability here. So in the study of people that went to treatment or in recovery, early stages, 85% report a family history of addiction with an average of 2 previous generations. And when I read that, I thought, well, you know what? We don't necessarily know what happened in the generations before. I don't want to rule them out. We just don't know. And their average ACE score, adverse childhood experience score, 4.3. And that original work done by, oh, thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much. The original ACE study done by Dr. Folletti and Dr. Anda, the top score was 10, 4.3. That's a significant amount of childhood trauma to unpack in all of this. And so what I want you to keep in mind is these adults also grew up in families where, as children, those families got hurt by addiction. Sis Wenger, who was the retired and iconic president and CEO of the National Association for Children Impacted by Addiction, calls them yesterday's children that nobody helped. So they're also kids growing up in families where they're hurt by addiction. And what did they learn as kids? And what has been reinforced their entire lives? Dr. Claudia Black's 3 family rules: don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. So all of these provide an additional challenge as we move forward. Okay, next slide. So how do we begin to break this multi-generational cycle? And please note that I spent 26 years at the Betty Ford Center as National Director of Children's Programs. And that was clinical work. It wasn't administrative, man. I was in there with my sleeves rolled up. What Mrs. Ford always said, you want to make a difference in a child's life? Don't just work with the child, work with who's ever raising that child. And so even though we're talking about parents today, you know what? It could also be a grandparent. It could be kinship family. It could be all of us as professionals. And so where does it stop? And we need to build bridges, because I'll tell you, the bridge from the child to the parent has been blown up by substance use disorder. And I'm not sure about you, but I am so visual in everything I do. And I can close my eyes and almost see, how we need to build that back. We need to build that infrastructure back. And if there, as we talked before about using a compass and trying to find my way directionally, I think with kids and with parents that have been through so much, what is that direction? Love. Let's get back to the love that's present. That love that's present, so often it's a substance use disorder that gets in the way of all of this. Okay, let's see. Let's go back a little bit. Other way, I
I
think.
don't know what happened.
I don't either. I promise me. I'm not allowed to touch any buttons. So yeah, that's okay. Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't touch the thing.
I believe you. Here we go. Here,
Okay.
here we go. And we want to create hope. Let's build on that love that's there. I want to create a sense of hope. And I think the way to create a sense of hope is to keep it simple. And let me just share one other thing, and we'll jump right into some really good strategies. And so when parents try to talk with kids and they're in early recovery, they need help in doing this. They just can't do it by themselves because things get blown up real quickly. And kids desperately need education and support because they don't understand it. So, and they either can't do it alone. And let me give an example. So the thing that I would hear most from parents, they'd say, that they're resentful and they're angry that their kids aren't giving them any credit for no longer drinking and using drugs. I say, they don't understand how hard treatment is. They don't understand how hard it is to do it on my own and go to meetings and maybe have a therapist. This is really difficult stuff. And why in the world are they not saying that to me? Well, you know what? Because no one has taught kids about treatment and recovery. And there's another part of little kids that are so afraid to trust. Because in times past, that's exactly what they did, only to be hurt and disappointed all over again. Now, for children, what they'll say is they get upset, they get resentful, they get angry when their parents get impatient and say, I'm not drinking, I'm not using drugs. Why won't you forgive me? Why can't you just move on? Because that's part of the baggage. And some of you who've been in trainings with me before know that for years I have a backpack filled with rocks, and it's all the baggage that we carry. And I'll tell you, so neither the parent nor the child feels heard, feels understood, or feels validated in all of this. Trust is something that's earned one day at a time. And I'm always encouraging people in recovery, because I know it's painful to walk through any of this. Always urge people in early recovery, slow down, slow down. Please, time is one of your greatest allies right now, if you will allow it to be. You're running so fast, it's like you're doing the 100-yard dash. And I got to tell you that recovery and healing is a marathon. It's just not that quick dash in all of this. Slow down and make it work. Next slide. So here's the irony. And and thanks to Nancy for giving me this topic. It's really allowed me, and I've got time now to really be able to think about things for a while, which I did. And isn't it ironic that if people in early recovery want to rebuild trust, get help for your kids now, today. That will change things dramatically in a way that nothing else can. We'll talk about the other things. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to look for a children's program. And the bottom line is, even before the pandemic and exacerbated by the pandemic, there are a few children's services available today for kids growing up in families where there's substance use disorder. That's why Nancy will always be a dear colleague and compatriot, because she's always had that focus. Well, I've got a program today that I'm going to refer you to that is virtual. Because you know what? When you live in a rural area, there simply aren't any services at all. So hold on that. And this is the order of preference for me. So if there's not a program, I want a counselor. I want kids to see a counselor. But here's the rub. It's got to be a counselor who has a double specialization. It's got to be a counselor that's really good with kids. Not everybody is. Or a counselor really good with teens. Not everybody is that. And some that are good with kids aren't good with teens, and vice versa. But it's also got to be someone who specializes in substance use disorder and trauma and family systems and codependency. And so it's hard to find those people, truly hard. So if you can't find those people, then I go to a book. And I'm gonna recommend a number of books for you this morning. But here's the deal. You cannot have a recovering parent go through that book with their child. Why? They're going to get triggered by what happened to them when they were a kid in all of this. And even though we're in good intention, things can quickly get out of control and get messed up in all of that. So we want to help. Let's give kids a program whereby they get an understanding. Let's have the grown-ups involved as well, so we create a common language, and they're being helped separately and then together. Let's get everybody on the same page. And it's got to be a program, and again, we'll talk about it more in depth in a few minutes. It's got to be a program that not only teaches kids about addiction or substance use disorder, but again, about treatment and recovery, because TNR is the arch nemesis of addiction. Hey, you know Superman, how powerful Superman is? There's one thing that messes Superman up, if you remember, and that's kryptonite. And so we teach kids that when it comes to addiction, the one thing addiction is afraid of is treatment and recovery. And so helping kids understand that. We want to introduce kids to a feeling vocabulary and give them ways to express themselves. You saw some of that powerful artwork. I've had other kids who just write, or other kids that are more verbal, or kids that want to do it experientially. But getting in touch with some of that, teaching them some self-care skills in all of this, and really opportunities to simply be a kid. Next slide. Oh, there they are. So yeah, just those right there. You see them again. Addiction, treatment, and recovery, opening doors to feelings, practicing self-care. I also want to teach them the 7 C's. That's the next slide. So this is part of the Sesame Street project that we'll talk a little bit more about soon. These are the 7 C's. I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't control it. And while it can mean very many different things, here we're talking about the addiction, the substance use disorder. But I can help care for myself by communicating my feelings, making healthy choices around self-care and around safety, and I can celebrate me and all the beauty and goodness I have inside. Well, those are some of the tenets of children's programs. Next slide. But now let's begin to talk about individual strategies. So what I encourage people in early recovery to do is 60 minutes a week with their kids in individual time. 60 minutes. Now, some people break this up and it's 2 30-minute times. Some people with that early childhood trauma of their own start out at 15 minutes and we coach them into more time. But this is about spending time, not money. I cannot tell you the number of times that somebody in early recovery, without asking their child things that they want to do, spend elaborate amount of time and energy creating something that that parent wished they could have done when they were a kid, and they present it to their kid, and their kid says, "I didn't want to do that. Oh my goodness!" And instead of closeness, we create a bigger we create a bigger gulf. You know what I suggest? Let your kids make a menu. Let them come up with 10 things to do. Are we kicking the soccer ball around? Are we listening to music and dancing? Are we playing a video game and getting demolished by our little one? Are we reading a book together? Are we doing a craft project? Oh, can we work toward that? Let me give you some examples. So when one of my, simple, thank you, Stacy, thank you. We gotta simplify this. We complicate it, and people aren't ready. Keep it simple. What an important mantra. So one of my daughters, when she was 7, 8 years old, what she wanted to do with me is play My Little Ponies. Remember? And they made a comeback. Ponies are around anymore. And I swear to goodness, they were breeding in my house because every time I looked around, there were more of them. There was Big Brother Pony. There was Sunshine Pony. There was Beach Pony. There was Codependent Pony. There was Shame-Based Pony that was isolating and off in a corner by themselves. And you know what we did? We took the little brush and we'd brush and we'd role play. And she just adored that. Focused attention. No electronics. Throw that stuff away. Put it in another room. Sacred time. I worked in the 1990s in a great treatment center, Sierra Tucson, in Tucson, Arizona. And one night I was doing My Little Ponies with my daughter. And there was a phone call for me from work. And I just said, hey, I'll call them back when I'm done. I'm doing something really special and important right now. And so now with my other daughter, when she was a middle schooler, she was a softball pitcher. So we would practice pitching. Just the two of us away. We could talk about stuff. We could hang out together. She had the entire attention. One time with my son, as a teenager, he loved paintball. Now, this is not a concept easily for me to wrap my arms around. So we got up so early in the morning, and I'm an early person. Nancy will testify to that. We drove a distance. That's okay. No worries. We drove a distance, and we ended up at a place where people were showing up with their faces totally painted in green and brown and black camouflage. They were wearing camouflage. I was disturbed. I didn't understand this. And I don't know about any of you. Ever been hit by a paintball? They hurt. That hurts. Oh man. I would try to hide most of the day and just and shoot a couple of times, but just stay out of the way. But that's something that he wanted to do. That was important. And it was the time in the car that made it all worthwhile. Next slide. I want to tell recovering parents there's 3 times that kids will talk. One is when they're in individual time. Because when you're kicking the soccer ball, you're shooting hoops, you're coloring, you're playing a card game, you just start talking in the car. Ever notice how kids talk so much in the car? Why do they talk in the car so much? Because I'm driving and my focus is not on them and I'm not all over them. I'm driving. And I said, you did what with whom? And bedtime. Bedtime, especially for younger kids, but also even into the teen years. You know what? I can, all the painful stuff, all the stuff that bothers me and I worry about, I can stay busy all day long and not feel that stuff till you try to lay your head on the pillow. So those are 3 important times where kids will talk. So make a menu, just show up. That in itself is a huge way. And like with anything that has to do with parenting or grandparenting, the big word is C, that consistency word. Most important thing of all. Next slide. We also suggest family night, 1 night a week, just weekly. And encourage people in early recovery, just the family, nobody else. And people have interpreted this in so many different ways through the years and always come back and tell us, hey, this is what we do that works. Because I need to learn from other people that do it successfully. Those are the people I want to hear from the most. So sometimes, you know what, it's everybody in the family makes the meal. So there's a 6-year-old, tossing the salad I would never eat. There's a 9-year-old putting things in the Jello mold, and we make the meal together, or we set the table and we eat. And after dinner, we play. We play for 30, 45 minutes. Less is more starting out. So what do we play? Maybe we play cards. Maybe, a spirited game of Uno. We listen to music. I've had people with younger kids put a sheet on the floor and it's dinner and a movie. It's pizza and it's Netflix. And we just hang out together as a family. I know a family, oh my goodness. This family is actually from Pacific Palisades. It's a long time ago, though. And what they did was they didn't make it family night, they made it family day. And so on Sundays, they returned to their faith and they would go and worship. They practiced their faith. And then as a family, they would all volunteer. And so there were times they were walking dogs. There were times they were in a soup kitchen in Los Angeles feeding folks. Other times, in a shelter, but just teaching their kids, but together as a family that, being of service to others and giving in our communities is another really special way that you can do all of this. So family night, next slide. And sometimes affirmation. So there is a book written by 3 children's therapists called Kids Power 2, Words to Grow By, that has been recently whole book reformatted, but it's like a 1 day at a time book for kids. The crazy thing is that adults enjoy it even more because each page is only 1 sentence. It's not a whole paragraph or 2 or 3 or 4. It's a sentence. I know sometimes people in early recovery will say goodnight to their little ones and they'll read that page and they'll go over it. And we'll talk about the beauty and goodness that we have and try to build upon that. So that's a suggestion. But the next slide, it's really important, is creating a family calendar. And so sometimes on Sunday afternoons or evenings, and you take a calendar, just a hard copy of a calendar. You want to put it up somewhere that's high traffic. It could be with a magnet on the refrigerator. I've had people tape it to the front door on the inside so everybody could see it. But all we're going to do during this next week gets recorded there. It's recorded there. So these are the individual times. Here's our family time. And here's pickups and all the other things we need to do in all of that. And again, consistency is the important word. But we don't live in a world that's a perfect place. So when plans go awry, what we need to do is acknowledge they've gone awry. Sometimes we need to apologize that they've gone awry when that's appropriate. We need to allow everybody to have feelings about it going awry. Then we reformulate the plan. How many times the kids tell me no one ever said sorry to me, no one ever acknowledged any of this stuff. Everybody stayed, don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. So having that family calendar, it adds accountability, but it also adds hope when kids can look at it and then there's actual follow through in all of this. Next slide. So I promised you this. So Hazel and Betty Ford Children's Program created a virtual program during the pandemic. I was one, there was four of us that we created this to be able to be of service. Now, I am old school, like you would not believe. I am so old school. I was in school with Fred and Barney from the Flintstones. That's how far back I go. So I always want to do everything in person. But the reality is, if I had to choose between that and nothing, I'm choosing virtual. And I've seen it work incredibly well. So this virtual program is 2 days. It's 6 hours total, 3 hours each day. And kids are ready. This is for 7 to 12. I'll talk about other ages in just a minute. But kids are ready. That's a good amount. What they've added since I was there, which I think is brilliant, is that parents and caregivers join as well. And they're in a separate room for about 35 to 40 minutes. Doing what? Learning what the kids are learning, creating that common language that they can share, getting everybody on the same page. And the great news is, and I checked it out, no child is ever turned away due to an inability to pay. So the program, and I'm not associated with it anymore, but I still love it and talk about it. So there's an option for you. Next page, please. So contact Heather Russo, and you just tell her that I sent you. You ask about teenagers. Yep. Guess what? Hazel and Betty Ford also offers a teen virtual program. So you could check with Heather about that. And also, one more, they offer a special parenting caregiver workshop that a lot of folks in early recovery find to be really beneficial as a way to reinforce some of these things and figure out a way to be able to show up during the time it's available to be with the kids, the people they love so much. So please check that out as a resource. Because I know, gosh, I spent the last couple of years, I've been around Illinois. I've been all over. I've been real rural areas. And gosh, to get services there, here's a place to start anyway. And I know that some of the families have actually participated over the last year or so that I've recommended it and have always come back with good results. So please check it out if it fits. Next slide. So Sesame Street in Communities Parental Addiction Initiative came out in 2019. You see Carly there, brand new Muppet. Look at her. Look how beautiful she is. Look at those lime green and look at those blonde pigtails. So the backstory is Carly's mom has a substance use disorder and it's around opiates. And Carly's mommy went to treatment and Carly's mom is about to come home. So Carly is excited and she's confused and she's worried and she's scared. So if you check this out, I know somebody so kindly put in the Sesame Street website for me. So if you look at it, there's a whole set of resources all online. And when Sesame Street put this together, and I was blessed to be a part of it, thank goodness, it's there for professionals like all of us, but it's for recovering parents. This is a safe place for recovering parents to figure out some things to do. How about simply with this? How about how do we define addiction in a way that's appropriate for kids? And so often, so many people in early recovery who also came from a family where there was addiction just don't understand child development. I mean, just something that they never got. And so in Sesame Street language, and we worked on this forever, addiction is a sickness in the brain that makes people think that they need alcohol or drugs to feel okay, and then they don't act like themselves. The sickness in the brain make people think they need alcohol or drugs to feel okay, and then they don't act like themselves, and people need to go get help. And so next slide. On that website, you'll see Play, Talk, and Imagine in both English and Spanish, thank goodness. And it's a digital storybook. And what it does in a way that I've never seen anything quite like it is they're able to explain what's going to happen when mommy comes home for Carly. Because there's Carly, and what Carly wants to do is she needs help. She wants to make 50 more jelly sandwiches. Because if mommy gets sick again, then there's food for her to eat. And with her, her, her teacher named Miss Mo, no relation to me whatsoever, please, is able to help Carly to see that when mommy comes home, here's what things are probably going to look like. But then what it also addresses, I mean, and I'll tell you, nobody I've ever seen is so child-centered and such a champion. When I was on site at Sesame Street, when we did the filming, I was in this room with about 45 people, and the passion and the electricity. And it finally just hit me recently that what was that about? I think I've never been in a room with so many people who love kids and who champion them and want to teach them in ways that are appropriate. So that is a great resource. And let the cat out of the bag a little bit. Sesame Street is now working on some new material. So in the next few months, look for some more activities here. Look for some more of Now Mom's Home. How do they rebuild trust in that relationship? So more to come with that. Next slide. The National Association for Children Impacted by Addiction, NACOA, a voice for the kids. And there's the website, nacoa.org. And write that down somewhere because, again, great resources. If you go to the next slide, the resource I really want you to see is Tools for Kids. And so this is free and this is downloadable. And in this Tools for Kids, I actually rewrote, if you like it, let me tell you, I actually rewrote the whole thing 17 months ago. If you don't like it, forget about what I just told you. But in it are the 7 C's. In it are answering kids' questions about addiction. And again, with little kids, we use the term addiction. I see it as the most age appropriate word to use. But in it are also oh my goodness, talking about feelings and talking about artwork, talking about safe people. But there's a couple of things I really want you to key on is go to, download that, go to the back, go to the bibliography. Because summer before last, I spent a couple months solid reading every new thing I could find for kids that have been written. And so take a look at all of those books. What's not listed here, but the companion is Tools for Parents/Caregivers. Especially look at the bibliography there. This is written for people in early recovery, but it's also written for professionals. But look at the bibliography there of really updated key books, because sometimes, guess what? Kids aren't going to get to a program. We can't find the right therapist or counselor. So hey, let's get a book or two and make sure that we find someone appropriate, maybe an aunt or an uncle, or to read this, work through this with kids. Next slide. What's missing, and let me just take a minute, if I were to tell you about a great resource I love for teenagers, it's Courage to Be Me. The book is a classic. It's been around a long time. It's Courage to Be Me. And what it really is talking about is, how can I be me when in my family with the isolation and maybe the guilt and how awful I feel about everything, I can still be me. It's like where Sesame Street talks in the 7 C's about celebrating me. And Courage to Be Me was actually written by teenagers for teenagers. It looks at the principles of the Alateen program, a 12-step program for kids. As time winds down, And I hope this has gone well for you. Geez, I feel like I'm flying. This has gone by so quickly. The one book that I'd recommend is Positive Discipline for Parenting and Recovery, a guide to help recovering parents. Now, Jane Nelson is known throughout the world for writing a couple of books simply on positive discipline and bestsellers. Positive, and this is back. This goes all the way back to the 90s. So, positive discipline in the classroom, positive discipline A through Z. But what happened is that recovering parents went to her at a workshop and said, "You don't understand. It's different for me because every time I go to give my kids a consequence when they don't follow the rules, my guilt and shame get in the way. And I let them off the hook to help me, but it doesn't help them." I mean, if you think about it, this could be an all-day workshop because what I haven't covered at all is in this book, and that's creating structure and routine. And it's important to rebuild trust. This is the time of the day that we get up. This is when we do homework. This is when we do chores. These are some simple rules in the positive. These are consequences when the rules get broken. We're all accountable for our behavior. This book, even though it's been around for a while, uh, Dr. Nelson and Ricky Inter and Lynn Lott, just incredible. And I'll tell you, for a best-selling author to listen to people in recovery and say, no, what you've done doesn't fit, and then they create that says an incredible amount about who they are as people. So that would be the book that the parents have found much comfort and much support in. And so next slide. Okay, so before, I don't know if we'll have time for questions. Let me end this way. And first of all, say, boy, it is my true hope that this morning maybe there's an insight that you hadn't had before, or maybe there's a strategy that you found that really makes sense. I've seen a couple of those things go by in the chat box, or that you have a resource that you haven't had before, because I'll tell you that everything that I've suggested, is at little or no cost. We need more resources. What I hear all the time from counselors and therapists: give me more resources. Make this practical. So again, if you want to stay connected with me, which I would thoroughly love, best place to stay connected is on LinkedIn. And that I'm on there. I sometimes write on there. So if you wanted to do that and just tell me that you met me here, that would be great. So let me end this way. Back maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, it was before the pandemic. In the evening, I got a call from a mom who was 4 months into recovery, still really early recovery. It was difficult, but she was hanging in. And she called me in the evening, and she was in tears. And she said, "I'm trying to do 30 minutes of individual time with my daughter. What she wants to do more than anything is play with dolls." And she said, "Jerry, I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm in the bathroom. I got to go back. You know what?" And she said, "I got abused just about the age that Lucy is now. And so much more of that needs to be addressed, but I get overwhelmed. I stopped being a kid when that happened to me, and I don't know what to do." So she'd been in a Betty Ford Center children's program, a few weeks before, and I said, "Listen, nobody loves you as much as Lucy loves you. So let's take a couple of deep breaths. Let's go back, see if you can't do 15 minutes. Let her guide you. Let her teach you. Give her the lead in all of this because she loves you." She went and she did it. The next evening, was continuing care night for kids and families that we would do every Wednesday at the Betty Ford Center. This mom came up 4 months, working on it the best she knew how, a day at a time, progress, not perfection. And she gave me a big hug and said, Jerry, thank you. You're not going to believe what happened when I was saying goodnight to Lucy and she was in bed. We said our prayers, we did our wishes, and all of a sudden she put her 2 arms around me and hugged me really, really tight. And she said, Mommy, this is the best day of my life because you played with me. Let's do more of that. And that's what we want to emphasize here. Use the resources, but simplicity. Keep it simple. One step at a time and one day at a time. And help people begin to enjoy the gifts of healing and recovery. And lastly, one more time, thanks to all of you for the incredible ways you serve children and families and the huge differences you make in their lives. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. And there's not much else to say. This is why we invite him back. I just love him. Have a good day. Be safe. I haven't been able to follow chat because I was working with the slides, and I want you to know that you are all so appreciated,
You
and
are.
we will stay in touch. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.